Hey everyone, we're going to continue today with chapter 2 of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, Search for Mr. Hyde. And this is part 1, looking at the way that Dr. Lanyon is first presented. Dr. Lanyon is one of the most important characters, certainly a character that could come up in your exam. So I'll give you a lot of key quotes and try to link a little bit of context around him. And then we'll do a part 2 where we look at the aftermath of chapter 2 after this meeting with Dr. Lanyon. If you haven't already watched or read a version of this chapter recently, please do that before you watch this video. This video is pretty much just the commentary and context that you need for your exam. We won't be going over exactly what happens in the chapter. So the first important quote before we get to Mr. Utterson going to Dr. Lanyon's house for advice is the fact that we find out that because Mr. Utterson is a lawyer, he has been given a will by Dr. Jekyll, and the will names Mr. Hyde, Edward Hyde, as the benefactor or the person that will receive Dr. Jekyll's wealth and fortune should anything happen to Dr. Jekyll, should he pass away. But what's weird is that most wills just say that when I die, my estate and all of my things will go to whoever, right? But in this will, this strange will that Dr. Jekyll has had drawn up, it also says the disappearance or unexplained absence of Dr. Jekyll for anything more than 3 months. So this is very odd. It adds again to the mystery of, well, why is Dr. Jekyll anticipating that he would go missing? That's not a normal clause or a normal thing that you would put into a will. Mr. Utterson is really upset about this. He doesn't understand it. He also doesn't understand why Edward Hyde has been named as the benefactor or the person that's going to receive all of the things that when Dr. Jekyll dies. It's important for you to know that Mr. Utterson and Dr. Jekyll and Dr. Lanyon, who we're going to talk about today, they've been friends for many, many years. Old friends, all the way back, like school, university, all that good stuff, right? And Utterson had never really even heard of Edward Hyde until very recently. And so, you can imagine if you're best friends with someone for years, and then out of the blue, they suddenly say, oh, if anything happens to me, or if I weirdly disappear, I want you to give all my stuff to this guy that I've never really mentioned in our long friendship. It seems really strange, doesn't it? So then Utterson decides to go and visit his friend, the great Dr. Lanyon. So the first epithet or description that we're given of Dr. Lanyon is great. Yeah. So this suggests that he's got a very strong reputation as a doctor. And there's this imagery of the idea that his house is where he receives his crowding patients. So we get this idea that Dr. Lanyon's a very successful doctor. He's helped many, many people with their illnesses, to heal them, to cure them, whatever. And he even lives in a place called Cavendish Square, which I don't know if today in London, Cavendish Square is still seen as a major place for medicine. But back then especially, it's described with this metaphor, the citadel of medicine. So this is like the center of all the best medicine and medical advances in Victorian England came out of Cavendish Square. All the best doctors lived there, including Dr. Lanyon, very famous high rep doctor with crowding patients, not just a few patients, so many that it forms a crowd, okay? And so Utterson has gone to his old friend Dr. Lanyon for some advice and to find out a bit more about whether Dr. Lanyon had ever heard of this Mr. Hyde guy in the long friendship he's had with Dr. Jekyll. And Dr. Lanyon is described as a hearty, healthy, dapper, red-faced gentleman. So we see that there's lots of positive descriptions of Dr. Lanyon, and the fact that he's hearty shows he's full of life. The fact he's healthy, obviously. Dapper means well-dressed, obviously. And red-faced, I think that's meant to suggest that he's just like full of, life and almost like so energetic that he's just always kind of a bit red in the face from like his movements and his, just the energy he's putting out all the time. He is getting older because it says he has a shock of hair prematurely white, but the word prematurely suggests that he doesn't seem old. Even if he is getting older, he doesn't seem like he's the sort of person that would have grey or white hair. He seems like he's so youthful and healthy and energetic. So you can see that this whole section is filled with positive descriptions about the energy and life and youthfulness of Dr. Lanyon. And then when Mr. Utterson comes into his house, he springs up out of his chair and welcomes Mr. Utterson with both hands. So we get this sense again of the imagery of this really, energetic, full of life kind of character. And the reason that's important is because later this will be massively juxtaposed. So when we see Lanyon again later, he will not be full of life and energy and youth. He will be dead, basically, walking death. They talk for a little while, and then when Utterson brings up Henry Jekyll, immediately Dr. Lanyon has a shift in his tone, so a tone shift. So he goes from being like really happy to see his friend Mr. Utterson and, you know, chuckling and very happy, to suddenly being very angry. He says such unscientific balderdash, and he starts suddenly flushing purple. This suggests that he's very angry. Would have a strange Damon and Pythias. Now, Damon and Pythias are basically two people that were so committed and loyal to each other, you'd never imagine them splitting apart. And yet he said that the lack of science in Dr. Jekyll's work is so unscientific and such BS, basically, such bad nonsense, that Dr. Lanyon has become so angry with Dr. Jekyll for his nonsense that he does feel that even a loyal couple would be split up as a result. Okay, so that's sort of an interesting image and symbolism. It's basically Dr. Lanyon saying, look, I don't have anything much to do with Dr. Jekyll anymore. He started to go wrong with his science. And it's interesting because Mr. Utterson doesn't understand at all. He just says, oh, that's okay. They've only differed on some point of science. So to him, he doesn't really care that much about the fact that the friends are having a disagreement. He doesn't understand just how big of a deal this is to them. Lanyon ultimately says, no, I've never heard of Mr. Hyde. So this adds more to the tension. We've got short sentences again, which I think are meant to add even more to the tension. But in effect, we see that, you know, Lanyon, who's been a lifelong friend of Dr. Jekyll, also hasn't heard of Mr. Hyde. So this again makes it seem very strange. All of this in the Victorian context would have been very mysterious. Normally, you wouldn't have someone joining into the circle of a Victorian gentleman's life randomly, unexpectedly, from out of nowhere. It didn't happen that way, especially because of the very important theme of class division and the very important context of class division. You had a very clear circle, an inner circle of upper class gentlemen. They all knew each other. They all, you know, went to dinners with each other. They all were within their little circle. And it would be very weird for someone to join that circle unexpectedly, like Mr. Hyde appears to have done. So that's the end of this video, and we'll do part 2 next time, looking at the rest of chapter 2. Thank you very much.